One thing about people with ADHD is when we're excited about something, we want to share it with everyone. It's an outcropping of our intense feelings about everything, and honestly, that's not something I want to change about myself. But it does have some knock on effects when it comes to being a game master, specifically when it comes to conveying your world building to your players. See, most people don't have lives 100% focused around tabletop games, and let me be real with you, that 10-page document or extensive wiki you wrote about your world is more than you can reasonably expect the average player to read, let alone fully absorb. I needed a way to convey the world to my players that wouldn't leave them feeling like they were reading a textbook, something that would leave them excited and wanting more. Hi, I'm Astral Marmot, and today I want to talk to you about how to make an in-world visitor's guide for your game. This is a bit different than my other videos because, well, I feel like it, and also I got ADHD and a million things to talk about. While this advice can apply to any game master, it's especially useful for those of us with the ADHD brain gremlin to boil down our slew of thoughts into something approachable and engaging. Visitor's guides are a way to give players vital information they need while sparking genuine curiosity for the setting. Best of all, you can do it with minimal graphic design skills using free programs online. Throughout the video, I'll mainly use examples from two guides I created, one for Zobeck, a city in the Kobold Press setting of Midgard, and one for Mosadz, a city in my homebrew world. They're both linked in the description so you can view them in full, and I think they're pretty great, but you don't need them to follow along. What's important, and probably obvious, is that I'm not a graphic designer and I was still able to pull them off. You can too. But why go through the trouble at all? Well, lots of reasons, really. It's immersive. Instead of reading a dry list of facts, players get to see the world as though it's a real place. It clarifies your world for the players and for yourself. The act of sorting through information for your guide will make the world clearer not just for your table, but for you as well. It's inspiring. Players won't latch on to everything, but there will be something that stands out to them that they want to know more about. Knowing what draws your players' interest before you go there makes planning that much easier. It helps you to be concise. When people with ADHD get excited about something, we can be a little wordy. This exercise forces you to boil your world down to the essentials. It's a hidden vehicle for plot hooks. You can bury hints about the main storyline all over the guide and see what hooks your players' interest. Finally, players love it. I've never met a one that doesn't prefer a visual guide to a Google Doc. I find they retain the information better and are likely to go back to the guide during the campaign to see if they can extract more clues. So how do you get started? If you have a document with your settings information in it already, great, you're already halfway there. What we want to do is create a short reference document for the visitor's guide that includes the following information. Major powers, 2 to 3 sentences about each major nation, country, or society in your world. The gods and religions of your setting, if any. Try to keep it to a sentence each unless a particular religion or god is uniquely important to the campaign. The local region, a quick summary about the area the party will start in. Follow that up with a section about government structure. Are they feudal, democratic, a republic? Have a few sentences about how societal decisions are made. Factions. Is the Glassblowers Guild very powerful? Do vampires have a stranglehold on the Eastern District? Write a sentence or two about each faction and the names of important members. Districts, including landmarks, points of interest, shops, taverns, inns, and other places players are likely to visit. Important NPCs, the leader of the region, local power brokers, mysterious visitors, celebrities, anyone who the players might have a reason to talk to or know about. Points of conflict between regions, factions, and important NPCs. This may or may not come up in the guide, but whether or not a region is currently at war, for example, will definitely influence how the city presents itself to visitors. Finally, include some bullet points about local cultural practices, the food they eat, the music they listen to, local idioms and expressions, coinage, and practices that may seem odd to outsiders. This information will be vital for adding flavor to your guide. It's critical at this stage to go wide and not deep. Limit yourself to a few sentences for each category, or better yet, bullet points. This is an overview of your world and not your campaign planning document. Not all of this information will make it into the guide, but it's useful to both A, have on hand, and B, distill your thoughts down to the bare bones, because, again, that's all you can reasonably expect your players to remember. I should note that my guides are regional and focused on the immediate area that the players are going to. Keeping it local helps me stay focused on what the players might actually interact with up front, and also lets me surreptitiously give the players a sense of how the locals operate. That said, this advice can apply to a world guide with just a little tweaking. See my friend Max's guide in the description for an example. Which leads me to the first thing to figure out about the structure of your guide. Who's writing this? Both of my guides were written by local factions. The Zobeck guide was published by the mayor's office, the Mosadz guide by the scribes who control the powerful library district. Both of these groups are biased towards their own concerns, and the guides reflect that. This is a good thing, especially if you make it obvious, because smart players will immediately know they're not getting the whole story and want to know more. But you can get creative here. What if each section was written by a different faction? That would give you an excuse to include deliberately contradictory information as each faction attempts to present their vision of the region as the truth. Which brings us to the next question. What would these writers want to say, or not say? The mayor of Zobeck has an incentive to present the city in its best light and hide the seedier side. The scribes and Mosadz believe the Great Library is the most important institution in the city, and everything else exists to support it. Their biases inform their choice of what to write about, but so does the region's reputation, its culture, and its primary industries. Look back at your campaign overview and picture yourself as the NPC or faction creating this document. If a stranger picked up your guide, how would you want them to see this place? Finally, how will you break it down? You'll want to chunk the information to keep it digestible. My guides are broken down by city districts. You could also break it down by writer or by function. All the shops in one section, all the industry in another, all the government information in a third. I've found districts to be the easiest since my world building already breaks a region down into distinct areas and cultures, but you should feel free to get creative. So now we have an overview of the area, we know who's writing the guide, and we know roughly how it'll be structured. The next stage is one I really enjoy, art. How to ethically search for art online is a topic that could take an entire video. The art in my guides was sourced from outside, and while I did my best to find the artist behind the original images, my guides are ultimately intended for private use. Put in the work to find the original artists, and respect them if they ask you not to use their work. However you find art, collect a few images that speak to each of the chunks you've divided your guide into. There's no hard and fast rule here, but try to limit the number of pictures you use per page to between 1 and 3, depending on your layout. The goal with art is for the picture to convey the feel of the space you're describing, so give the art space to speak for itself. Now we can begin assembly. For the Zobeck guide, which I made before I knew anything about editing, I used Canva.com, an online graphic design program which has a ton of templates and makes the bar for design very low. They do have a premium subscription, but I've honestly never used it and never needed to. The free version is totally sufficient, and you can just upload any graphic elements you're missing. Once I learned a little bit about editing, I switched to Photopeia.com for the Mosadz guide, which is an online photo editor that's free with advertising. It's intuitive enough that I was able to teach myself most of the skills I needed just by using it. And if you don't have access to Photoshop but know how things like layers work, Photopeia is a great option. It's possible to go even simpler. My friend Max made his guide using Google Docs and Paint.net. There are links to all these programs in the description, but use whatever program you're most comfortable with. If anyone has suggestions for other good free resources, share them in the comments. So let's lay out the overall structure for the guide. Remember, this is just how I do it. If you look at how Max made his guide, it's laid out entirely differently than mine, and that's great. Regardless, here's the way I go about it. Cover page. This is technically optional, but it does add a lot to the reading experience. Keep it simple. Have the name of your guide, a picture, and information about who's publishing the guide. Maybe a quote. Don't overthink it. Introduce the region. In my Zobeck guide, this page goes over the basic history of Zobeck, why it's called the Free City, why industry is so important to it, and some local flavor about Gearforged. For the Mosadz guide, I opened by going over the laws and customs of the city, as this would be a primary concern of the lawful order of the scribes. Use your overview not just to tell the players about the setting, but instead to tell them what the people of this setting think is important for them to know. The real meat of the guide is here, broken down into bite-sized chunks. How you break that information down is again up to you. Mine, as I mentioned, is broken down by district, and I use color and art to give each district a unique feel. That said, try to keep some visual consistency. The fonts I used for headers, subheaders, and body text are all the same across each guide, and the Mosadz guide pages have the same border and background overlay. This is pretty basic stuff, but it's helpful to know if you don't have experience in graphic design. Also, limit yourself to one page per chunk of information, whether that's districts or world regions or whatever. This forces you to be concise, and concision is one of the purposes of doing this. Maps are optional, and if you're using this to introduce the region to your table prior to the start of a campaign, I would honestly leave them out. I included district maps and keys in an early draft of the Zobeck guide, and it was complete overkill. Too much information crammed onto one page. Truth is, without the context of the game, the map won't mean much to your players. If you have a large city or region map, you could throw it in at the end. Overall, I've learned it doesn't add much except more visual clutter. That's really it. Those are the bare bones of what you need. But what exactly should you put into it? My guides both share the overview of local customs, breakdown by district, highlighting points of interest, and name-dropping factions and NPCs. But there's room here to underscore specific aspects of the region that are uniquely important to your campaign. In my Zobeck guide, an entire page is dedicated to the city's patron goddess Rava. But rather than approach it as an info dump, I wrote a prayer that included the key information about her. Rava is a goddess of gears and the clockwork oracle. She's considered the mother of all gearforged. Industry and labor are expressions of virtue. Sloth and idleness are expressions of sin. She controls the loom of fate. What's a clockwork oracle or the loom of fate? Who cares? If your players do, they'll ask. This is what I mean by going wide, not deep. You could give them all the information on the clockwork oracle, but since at this point it's not connected to anything in the narrative, they're just as likely to forget it. Don't bother explaining everything. In fact, definitely do not explain everything because it will leave your players hungry for more. Another thing to include is coupons, which are basically just bait to put on your plot hooks. Does a local tavern hold campaign-critical information? Put a coupon for 50% off of drinks and watch your players practically run there. Warnings are also bait. The Zobeck guide tells visitors to stay out of the cartways, and the Mosadz guide regretfully informs readers that the library's story path is closed for renovations. It is a fact of science that being told they can't go somewhere is the fastest way to get a party to go there. And remember those idioms and cultural practices you came up with for the overview? Sprinkle those in like candy. Mosadz is the city of story. They say well told instead of welcome and are more likely to ask how your story's going than to ask how you are. Highlight these practices in a context that makes them clear, and if the locals have their own language, include some examples of it. This adds flavor, makes it feel like a real place, and helps to distinguish it from every other region in your world. Again, keep it brief. Both of my guides are 8 pages, including the cover page, but the text is sparse, a sentence or two per point of interest, rarely anything that could be considered a full paragraph. Max, like a pro, got his guide down to 5 pages. Check out some real-life travel brochures and see how they use art and language to draw you in. Use pictures to say what you can't with words, and let the things that are unstated be just as intriguing as the things that are. All right, to summarize, Visitor's Guides are an immersive tool to get players to care about the campaign before it starts. Start from a condensed world-building overview that lays out the basics of your world. Break it down into digestible bites. Write from an in-world perspective. Keep the text very light and imply more than you say. Use coupons, warnings, and cultural idiosyncrasies to add flavor and draw your players deeper into the world. That's it. Thanks for watching this video. If you can't tell, I absolutely love making these guides and my players love reading them. Leave me a comment below about how you like to present critical information to your players, and if you've ever made a guide or something similar, I'd love to see it. Thanks to Max for sharing his guide and giving me this whole idea in the first place. And special thanks to Jastrada, Josher Barnapal, Scalpel, Magical Mary, and Taito for being the first monthly subscribers to this channel. It really does help me continue making content. If you want to see more videos from me, you can also buy me a cup of tea or become a monthly subscriber by visiting ko-fi.com/Astral Marmot. As always, if you found this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I'm working really hard to improve my skills and videos, and I'd love to have you along for the journey as I do. Thanks again for watching. Go get a glass of water, and may your players dive into your world building with all the gusto it deserves. And unclench your jaw.